Hello. So let's see. We're starting a new section today on animal leadership. And since the last lecture went basically to the maximum length it could go, I'm going to go a little more concise on this lecture and try to do a third to half of the content now, a third to half tomorrow, and then if there's any residual left over, then we'll do that next week. And then we will move into the very heady, very cerebral, very ethereal, i.e., based in reality, but almost entirely unexplored phenomena, at least in the context of social evolution, complexity theory, which is basically a union of mathematics, economics, physics, and complex systems, which basically just means that lots of deterministic things are happening, lots of things are contributing to the outcomes of the system, and they're not all linear. So that the relationships between some variables and outcomes are not just like straight lines with a standard slope. It could be curves or could have a lot of other different properties based on the conditions of other variables, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so it gets complex, i.e. difficult to infer the outcome of the system based on the inputs. And there's a whole group of theory to talk about that, those kinds of problems, those kinds of systems, which can go anywhere from the human brain to human and animal societies to emergent properties of traffic systems in cities and everywhere in between. So lots of complex things in life. Animal societies are one of them and are being used more and more to sort of address theoretical questions in complexity theory. Anyway, so that's going to be next week. La-di-da. This week is about key individuals, which are defined as individuals that have an inordinately large influence over the collective behavior and the success of their societies. And so animal leaders are probably the most famous version of these, of key individuals. So animal leaders are usually movement leaders, like the individuals are found at the front of the group, but oftentimes those individuals are determining where the group goes, what sorts of resources they'll acquire, where they're going to sleep tonight, where they're going to get water. And so naturally, those sorts of movement decisions, which determined all of the environmental factors surrounding the group, are really important. And so the individuals that are making these decisions presumably should be influential. So we'll see if to what degree that's actually true by the end of this lecture, or at least I'll question it over and over and over and give you an undefined answer because no one really knows. Said a lot. All right, so the unit will go over what are key individuals. We'll go over different kinds of key individuals that are well known, reconciliatory individuals, which I mentioned in the last lecture, but I'm going to go over again now. Or in this lecture, super spreaders, hams, aka hyper-aggressive males, leader-follower dynamics, and some of the hypothesized origins of key individuals. How do they show up? Where are they influential? Et cetera, et cetera. All right, key individuals are defined as individuals that have a disproportionately large influence over group outcomes. So group outcomes could be like how aggressively the whole group attacks a rival society, or which path it takes when it migrates home, or where it will, a group will, and whether or not it will move through human-altered landscapes, or it could be how frequently mating is occurring within groups, or it could be something like how rapidly disease spreads through the group, or whether or not the group is even susceptible to disease at all because of some sort of herd immunity type phenomenon, or behavioral hygienic behaviors that are caused by this key individual. So basically the two important features are, one, these individuals, whatever they are, key individuals, are rare, i.e. they're influential, so they're important for group outcomes, but they're not abundant. So it would make sense that a phenotype or kind of individual, a category of individual that's in a group, if that were a common category, i.e. constituted a large proportion of the group, would be influential, wouldn't it? Because they constitute a large percentage of the group, not key individuals. Key individuals are by definition comparatively rare, and yet, despite their rarity, they exert a large influence over how a group performs and acts. You can think of it like a little like fly president or a matriarch of an elephant society or something like that. They are a rare role. It's occupied by a special kind of individual, and then if you remove that individual, the way the whole group would behave would change, and in turn how they perform could also change. So based on the fact that I just mentioned like presidents and matriarchs and things like that, leaders, you might imagine like this should be a taxonomically restricted kind of concept, i.e. that it should be mostly in primates or in cetaceans like whales and dolphins, or maybe in packs of wolves or dogs, things that are like, we think are smart, we think are kind of like us, we see ourselves in these animals, and so, you know, key individuals sounds like something that would be anthropomorphic, anthropocentric, and so animals that are like us should tend to have keystone individuals, and species that are, you know, lowly species like sponges or like insects or something, that those should tend not to have keystone individuals. But that's actually not true at all. Pretty much anywhere from individual cells in on a petri dish to cetaceans and primates and things like that. Pretty much any animal, and indeed microbial taxon where we've explored this sort of concept of key individuals, we find them. So key individuals that exert a disproportionately large influence over the collective behavior and performance of a group are widespread. They can occur in insects, they can occur in vermiform, i.e. worm form invertebrates, they can occur in vertebrates of all possible kinds, they occur in microbes. Animals don't have to have some sort of sophisticated brain in order to have instances where rare and influential individuals emerge as a social product of a group structure, right? Okay. The term notably is agnostic to the direction of the impact of these individuals on group performance and success. So what I mean by that is that the individuals might be helpful. These rare and influential individuals might help their group. Knowledgeable matriarchs might know where to find food when it's scarce. They might know the safe places to rest at night, which are, you know, not frequented by predators or poachers or things like that, right? But also there are cases where key individuals have inordinately negative impacts on the performance of their group, so that their presence when they're in the group hurts the group, changes the collective phenotypes, the collective traits of societies, that in turn negatively impacts how that whole society performs. So these key individuals can help you, but they can also hypothetically hurt you. So the key ingredients are this kind of individual is rare and it's influential. The direction of its influence, helping the group soar or wither and die, either one's okay to fulfill this category. In fact, I almost certainly will ask you questions along these lines on your midterm exam. Hope you'll probably write some of them. Okay, so key individuals versus key role. So key individual is influential because of its traits. It has something about what it is, something about its traits, its intelligence, its creativity, its personality, its body size, its age, whatever, its position in a social network that make it influential for how the group behaves and performs. Right? So there's something about this dog, this African painted dog here, that makes it especially influential in this group. Maybe it has the most experience, maybe it knows how to find a particularly elusive kind of prey or subdue prey that are particularly difficult to catch. It's a living archive of information. It's able to acquire new kinds of information. It's bold, so it leads the group through dangerous, human-occupied, threatening landscapes that allow it to access other patches of resources that other groups would not. Whatever. The important thing is that that individual has something special about it that makes it have those effects that other individuals can't so easily replicate, right? So if we remove this super influential individual, it's not like some other individual could just be like, whatever, now I'm creative, right? So there's something special about that former individual that made it influential. Contrast this to a keystone role, a key role, which are influential social roles, but the individuals that occupy them aren't like special. It's not something about them endogenously that makes them occupy that role and occupy it in a special way. And if we were to remove the individuals from this role, somebody else would take it on. So if we just watch like a group of horses bumbling around, these are going to be domestic horses, bumbling around in some field, we would say, oh my God, this white stallion is the leader because it tends to be at the front end of the group. And when it moves, the other members of the group tend to waddle over towards it. Waddle for a horse, whatever, like saunter over, that's even more anthropomorphic, whatever. They follow it. But if we take that stallion away, if we see that the group's rate of meandering and where it meanders in this pin is identical, and that's just some other individual. Now this mare over here, this roan mare, bumbles around and everyone's following it and attempts to have the same sort of kinds of path and level of exploration, et cetera, et cetera. Anything you could measure about the collective behavior of the group seems equivalent. It's just now this other individual tends to be the one initiating those movements. Well, that is an example where that movement leader is not actually a keystone individual. It's not a key individual. There's something special about that stallion that made it that movement leader. It just occupied a role that might have been influential, but was readily replaced upon its departure. So key roles versus keystone individuals, key roles versus key individuals. So key individuals are difficult to replace. There's something special about them that cause their influence, their social influence. Key roles are things that can be occupied by many different kinds of individuals and are semi-readily replaced. Notice how I said semi-stable, like with key individuals, like it's something semi-stable about that individual. There's a lot of gray area here, like, okay, we removed this matriarch and the group did crappy for like a number of years, but then eventually started to do better. And some other individual came to occupy the matriarch role as they aged and learned more about the landscape. Is that a key individual or a key role? Is a matriarch a key role, or was that former matriarch a key individual? Well, because it took a long time for another individual to replace it, I would err on the side of calling it a key individual and not necessarily just some Joe Schmo individual occupying a key role. However, if it had happened almost instantaneously, I would say that a matriarch is a key role, but that many kinds of individuals can occupy it. All right, so there are lots of gray areas. Age, hunger status. Yeah, oftentimes the most influential members of the group are the ones that are the hungriest, because they'll basically instigate a group to go out and look for food. They're more likely to instigate a group to take risks. So things like hunger status, which change over very short periods of time, or can change over very short periods of time, tend to cause individuals to occupy key roles, but not become keystone individuals unless they've got some metabolic reason for why they're always hungry. And such things exist in nature. There's individual variation in how much any animal is determined or motivated to eat. Right? And so if you have something metabolically about you that is relatively stable through time that always causes you to be the hungriest group member, well then, now you might be a key individual, i.e. upon your departure, the group isn't instigated to go forage as frequently because its hungriest group member isn't around anymore. Okay, you get the general gist. All right, so key individuals here. Oh my God, I have to move myself around 1 second. I'm in the middle of this thing. Key individuals versus key roles. So imagine a senior member of the pack, and they know how to subdue large and profitable prey, like one of these African painted dogs here. Cool, right? Removing these individuals, if they're particularly knowledgeable, may eliminate access to that resource for a long period of time. If that is true, then that individual might have been, or probably was, a key individual, at least in the context of foraging, right? But given time, other individuals might age and learn how to reacquire that tactic. But the fact that there's a prolonged latent period where the group has a suppression in their ability to access that resource, and then that is reconstituted later, suggests that it's a key individual. And the longer that it takes, the more likely that we would deem this to be a key individual. The shorter amount of time it would take, the more likely we would call this just a key role that is occupied by many different kinds of individuals. Obviously, this is a gradient. Okay. One ecological context keystone is another context Joe Schmo. So that means that the kinds of individuals that are influential in one kind of collective outcome might not be influential in other kinds of collective outcomes. Ideally, the gold star key individual, those like knowledgeable matriarchs, would be influential in how groups behave and perform in a variety of different contexts. But more often we find that the individuals that are influential in one kind of context might not be influential in another kind of context. So a knowledgeable matriarch, which might be postmenopausal in some kinds of animal societies, would be potentially irrelevant for determining things like sexual interactions in their groups because they're not a sexually active individual any longer. They couldn't reproduce if they wanted to. So a knowledgeable matriarch might be influential for things like the maintenance of culture and transmission of information in their group, determining its safety and access to resources, all valuable things, but then she might turn out to be totally irrelevant in other kinds of important ecological aspects of the group, like copulatory networks and transmission of, I don't know, sexually or socially transmitted infections that are transmitted from bodily fluid exchanges during copula. She's irrelevant for that. Okay, And conversely, a high libido male might be incredibly important in determining a group's susceptibility to things like an STI. One or a few high libido males could cause the whole group to transmit a sexually or socially transmitted infection much more effectively. But if those individuals are young males, let's say, just by stereotypes here, but we're talking about non-human vertebrates, but let's operating by stereotypes here. Imagine that they're young. They're probably going to be irrelevant for things like foraging innervation or living archives of safety for the herd. So one kind of individual might be influential in one context. A very different kind of individual could be influential in another. We would call them both key individuals, but we would be careful to specify how we are referring to them as a key individual. All right, and what specific ecological functions have we been measuring? So I've been talking about knowledgeable matriarchs. I've mentioned this previously, that oftentimes the oldest females of these herds of elephants will be living archives of information about the safety of the landscape and where profitable and rare resources can be found in times of drought or low, what am I going to call this? Particularly trying, onerous, stringent years ecologically. So knowledgeable matriarchs, when they're present in a social group, i.e. particularly old females, are more likely to ensure that their groups can find rare water holes during the drought season. They're more likely to be able to help groups navigate through the landscape and remember specific routes between places that are safe to sleep at night or places that are able to drink water. And that's all well and good. Groups that have these knowledgeable matriarchs can be very helpful under normal circumstances, but these knowledgeable matriarchs can also be really costly. So, for instance, if this knowledgeable matriarch knows the lay of the land, but we have to transmit this whole social group of elephants because they turn into a problem group of elephants to a new location, and she knows that new location because she's old enough to have been there before, it's been shown for some groups of elephants that these females will guide their social group back to where they originally came from. Groups that don't have these knowledgeable matriarchs, they don't try to reorient home because they don't have the individuals that are knowledgeable enough, experienced enough to know where home is any longer. But groups that have those really profitable females, those matriarchs that were so blessed to have them in other contexts, can actually be ruined by them because those females will try to take them home to where they came from before because she knows where that is. And oftentimes that will involve things like crossing lots of busy streets and roads and through farms and get these herds fragmented, or will make them more likely to be hit by cars or be poisoned by humans. And so those same social groups can actually be hurt by their matriarchs in a different set of ecological circumstances. And that's kind of a neat thing that I need to point out, that the same kind of individual that can help your group, that's influential in helping it in one context, causing the group to soar, can end up hurting the group or disadvantaging it in another set of ecological conditions. So influential and in both directions. And so the profitability of having these individuals can change based on the circumstances surrounding them. In which case they kind of turn out to be a linchpin or an important lever in determining the performance of the group. So there you are. So another example might be things like dominant males and olive baboons. So in olive baboons, dominant males, older males, tend to be more daring about the resources that they will attempt to access. And they guide their groups into those scenarios where they're able to access new kinds of resources like human garbage that's particularly profitable and delicious, etc. The problem is that when they do that, they're more likely to interact with kinds of novel pathogens that are common in human or human cultivated animal populations that can sometimes be transmitted to these olive baboons. So we found that, not me personally, but Sapolsky found that these dominant individuals that are so important in helping their group detect new resources and new patches can also cause idiopathic outbreaks of bovine tuberculosis and cause massive die-offs in their social groups. So again, a classic example of where the same kind of individual that can help its animal society under one set of ecological circumstances can hurt it in another. And so then you have to ask yourself, if these things can turn into, if these key individuals can turn into a liability, then why should a social group pay attention to them at all? Should you begin to lose trust in them? Can key individuals become less influential through time if they turn out to be costly? Or could, in the future, could animal groups evolve to not have these kind of key individuals any longer, or to discount the information that they provide based on new kinds of ecological challenges? That is an alarm going off that the broccoli that I'm roasting for lunch is now finished, which means I am now 19 minutes into this lecture, which is a little shorter than I wanted it to be, but I will let it sit there. Oh, I'm actually at a natural breaking point. Haha, look at that. I meant to do it all along. There's no broccoli in there at all. Anyway, so I will see you guys tomorrow, and I will try to slam out 2 or 3 sections of this so that we have just a little bit of this to do next week. But please enjoy this short lecture today. I hope you found it interesting. And again, come to office hours on Friday, 2 to 4, if you want to talk to me about your exam, et cetera, et cetera. I have a couple of emails I need to finish off today from students. If you are one of those students whose email I have not gotten back to just yet, heads up, I'm so sorry. I will get back to it as soon as I can. I just had the other things going on. Anyway, so hopefully I'll be soon. Take it easy. Have a good one. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Stop, Mike.